So it seems like more than ever, people are wanting to start a business, and it's more enticing to use AI because it's the hot thing. Hunter, in your experience as a technical developer, as a software company founder, someone who lives and breathes in the trenches working with AI tools, what is the reality of what it's capable of? And what is it just like headlines and clickbait and things that people are just kind of terrified that it can do? But in reality, it's nothing like that.
It's an interesting question, and I think ultimately it comes down to it. It depends on who you are and kind of what your role is. Because, so for example, someone like myself, professional coder, coding at least full time, most of the time more than full time, every week. There's a lot of use cases. I use AI every day to help me do my job better. In specific instances, there's things that I found it's useful to do. It actually saves me time, or it gets me results that I couldn't do by myself. But then there's other things that there's times when I actually find AI hindering me, and I kind of silence my AI tools for a while because I don't want it suggesting too much and harshing my creative vibes. So I think it depends on who you are. Someone like me, I think what I found reality, sitting down and just kind of auditing my own AI use, typically 5 to 10 hours a week, I would estimate, of saved time in writing code. And we can kind of dive into some of those use cases specifically if you want as well. But again, I think it depends on who you are and what you're trying to do with it, really.
You said something that just instantly pinged with me, is that sometimes you have to shut AI off to,
Mm-hmm.
kind of recapture some of that creativity. That stuck with me instantly because I've just been experiencing that myself. Um, there was a month or two in my job where I used it extensively for almost everything. And I started to kind of get the vibe that my personality wasn't coming through in my work. And so I did exactly what you did. I shut it off. And it kind of dawned on me that I haven't used a section of my brain for a little while. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it rested, but man, I was on fire and just doing some great things. Before we get into the use cases, I wanted to really quickly hit on that piece a little bit more, because I would love your perspective on something I heard recently, that people who overutilize AI um, are getting progressively lazier in their work.
Mm-hmm.
And I, my first gut reaction is nah, because I'm a big AI user. But once I shut it off and did, real human work for nonstop for a whole project or whatever it was, I kind of thought about it. I was like, wow, I haven't used that portion of my mind for a little while. What's your thoughts on that?
The biggest thing for me and coders, I think one of the biggest widespread use of AI was Copilot, GitHub Copilot, right? So I'm sitting there typing my lines of code, and Copilot is an AI that is sitting there and trying to predict how to finish my lines of code or my functions or whatever. It can do multi-line, and it'll pop up in gray a suggestion, and it's like hit tab to accept. And a lot of times it's really useful, but the times when, depending on the type of code that I'm writing, if it's more just busy work or it's very kind of set in stone, or the goal is clear, it's awesome and it can save you a whole bunch of time. But if you're really getting into the weeds and trying to figure out something new or trying to solve something that no one's done before, yeah, I find it kind of like, as opposed to me coming up with my own original ideas and then trying them out and either finding out if they do or do not work. If you have an AI that is sitting there giving you ideas, now instead of creating ideas, you're evaluating ideas, right? Because you're non optionally presented with that information. It's very difficult to just ignore, right? If you're typing along and all of a sudden there's more stuff right at the end of your cursor, like, you're gonna read it. And so now you kind of switch modes from that original creation of ideas into like, oh, now I need to evaluate this and decide whether or not I'm going to hit tab. So there certainly is a time and a place to use it, but I also think too, like, if you really believe that an AI could do what you're doing completely right without any of your own original ideas, then like, why are you doing what you're doing? So Copilot's one I go back and forth. Like, weekly. I'll turn it on and then off and on.
I never thought of it in the idea of switch tasking and related to AI tools, but it's very true. So your brain is incapable of multitasking.
Mm-hmm.
We think we can do multiple things at once. In reality, we're just taking exponentially more time to do it. And so, a good idea of example to try out yourself is to list your ABCs and then list count. And then, if you try to do that 1A, 2B, 3C, it takes, I think, 2 to 3 times more time to actually do it than if you do them sequentially. Using AI tools could potentially have some of the similar effects. So while you do get productivity increases or speed increases by using AI, in reality, maybe some of that is counterbalanced by the your brain switch tasking from its own original creative thought, diving into its own lines, thinking it into its own, repository of known information that you have, and just going into the AI, trying to parse that, trying to discover if it's actually true, how you fit that in there. Maybe you aren't actually getting those speed bumps, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think too, I mean, the type of AI is really important, right? The Copilot experience where something's going alongside you and just offering suggestions as it goes, very different from like a generative AI experience where you're going out and kind of actively engaging it. As a programmer, you're always trying to maintain that kind of that flow state. And so there's times when might interrupt a thought that you're having and you're like, no, get out of my way. I'm working here.
The other thing I was thinking about too, in relation to using a lot of these AI assistants or ChatGPTs, is it kind of brings everyone's work to the center. So there's no real creativity if everyone's using these tools because everyone's kind of massing towards whatever it's saying. I saw a thing on Twitter recently where the papers with the word delve in the title or
Mm.
abstract has increased by like 40 times in the last 2x.
Mm-hmm.
And it even has been happening within like medical research papers and stuff. And it's a word that is hardly ever used in the English language, throughout a lot of these like papers in academia and all this stuff. But due to ChatGPT and these AI models overusing that word, it's now just exploded. So it's a really good indicator like, hey, someone's probably using ChatGPT to write their paper for them.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I never thought of that. So I apologize, Hunter. Let's take a step back. Explain your background and experience with AI. Where did it all start? How long have you been using it?
I mean, my background with AI, I got a degree from UNO in computer engineering and took a few courses there in, deep neural networks and things like that. And actually, I was just talking to a friend of mine last week, and looking back on that curriculum, it's almost laughable, even just a few years ago, how much more rudimentary and just not effective that the AI was, even though it's ultimately the same underlying technology. It's just the GPUs have come so far, and mass training, things like that. So took a few classes at in college, and then went to industry software engineering for several years at a few different companies that were not at all AI oriented, very much deterministic, just writing software to do the things. And honestly, my use of AI in a professional sense, and like rubber meets the road, pretty much correlated with with the release of ChatGPT, as I'm sure is the case with hundreds of thousands of people. Um, but yeah, kind of seeing that for the first time, I'd always kind of track things state of the art and whatnot, and obviously that was a bit of a paradigm shifting moment for a lot of people, where it was like this could actually be broadly useful for a lot of use cases. So yeah, kind of at that point, just started digging deep into all the different kind of possibilities, and was working on CodeBuddy at that time already, and so immediately started to see some of the places where we could leverage that to our advantage. And I like to joke sometimes that some of a lot of the major features actually that like some of these companies have come out with, function calling, things like that, internet searching, allowing a GPT to internet search, were things that I had kind of sandboxed in a console app early, 6 months or so prior to public release, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, but I'm not good enough to make this completely work, but this is definitely a thing that's going to happen. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of a little bit of my background on.
So, as someone who went to school and started your career with none of these tools, and then they quickly started hitting the market and hitting our world, what have you seen has actually been useful to you, though, like to actually get higher productivity? Where do you think that it has been useful in business cases within coding, and then where has it been not effective? And it just seems like, oh yeah, we put AI in this, and now
Mhm.
you have a chatbot, but it actually doesn't really do anything.
I would say I think the biggest maybe misconception about AI, broadly speaking, is that like there's a level of intelligence in it, and it's either good enough to broadly solve this problem start to finish, or it's not good enough, right? And you see that all the time, right? You can go and find articles about like, can AI write a full web app from start to finish and publish it? But I think really what I've seen in my experience is the AIs of today are, sufficiently complex, let's say, to solve a size of problem. Right? They have certain context windows. The hallucination kind of problems and truth grounding has gotten way, way, way better. That was pretty much the biggest knock on them to start with. And really, the way that I like to think of it is AI models are pretty much smart enough to solve any problem, provided that you scope it down small enough, and you provide the appropriate constraints, right? So, for example, like in my work, I might write a function, which is maybe, 50 to 100 lines of code to do a specific task, like store an image in the database, right? And I've found that, for things like that, provided you scope it down enough, like AIs are going to be good enough to write that, and probably write it at a pretty close to a human level, which is fine, right? Generating code, that's just like a time saver. Um, it wouldn't have taken me that long to do it in the first place, but it is nice. But it gets really interesting too when you think about kind of using that as a just an intelligent problem solver of a small problem, right? So I don't know. I always think it's interesting when you see people use large language models as like a classifier, right? So you have a certain number of things that like sentiment classification was a big problem, right? People would take tweets and they want to know like what percentage of these tweets are generally positive or generally negative, right? And there was whole bodies of academic research and lots of work put into building custom sentiment classifier models. But it turns out now that's a small enough problem to take a piece of text and say like, is this person generally sentiment positive or sentiment negative, that you can just ask a large language model and the results are super good. So I think what I've seen, I guess more broadly, is just you can kind of think of it as a very intelligent being that can solve most of your problems, but you really got to do the work in decomposing those problems and making sure that you set the stage, and you're not trying to ask it to do multi-step large things, and just hoping, for good results. And I don't know if that makes sense, but sort of the way that I think of it.
Wanted to talk about misconceptions about AI.
Mm.
Reasoning what you can use it for, the ability to can use it so much that you're starting to get lazy and not use. We've already covered that, but there's a lot of misconception. There's a lot of bias, and some of it's founded, some of it's unfounded. I wanted to kind of pick your brain from your perspective, someone who actually works in this. Other than ChatGPT, I don't do anything AI, so my capacity is limited to speak on that. But you always hear there's going to be people who say it's going to be the greatest thing in the world, and it's going to make everyone billionaires, and no one's ever going to have to work a day in their life. And the versus the other side that says, this is how Terminator started, and so talk to us about some of those misconceptions you see.
No, yeah. I mean, I think it depends when you say misconceptions, like what you're talking about, because if you go and read the recommended articles from your Google or your Twitter, there's a different level of misconceptions there than there is like just talking to folks, just because of the nature of clicks and what they're trying
Sure.
to do. But I think there's a lot of just trying to classify AI in a binary sense of like, can it replace this person's job or not? Um, and I think I'm not aware of any like widespread cases where, you know, ChatGPT or some large Anthropic came out and all of a sudden this job ceases to exist. Because I think it's ultimately about how each person decides to utilize AI for their own jobs, and also there's an element of skills curve, right? So the same way that you have like a normal curve of development skills, let's say software development skills, there's also that same curve of how effectively can you use AI, right? And so if you're at the top of that curve, right, you're probably going to be able to use it to do quite a bit just because you can be creative and um, flexible. But generally speaking, I don't know, misconceptions on AI. It really just depends on the industry and the use case and things like that. But
I have an example for you. So this came up pretty recently. There is a new platform that's kind of swept the internet, especially the Twitterverse, the last couple months. Or sorry, Xverse. I don't know if that's the thing.
mm,
The Devon AI, which
mm-hmm,
ironically is the same name as your co-founder at
mm-hmm,
CodeBuddy. So I know he loves getting this question. That has caused a lot of stir in the software development community, and we've actually had people talk to us where they're like, is this going to replace software developers, this Devon platform? So as a software developer, knowing the ins and outs and kind of where the technology is currently and where it seems to be heading, what's your view on a platform such as Devon, which runs AI agents, and its ability potentially to actually replace a software developer?
Devon it's an interesting one because, yeah, like you said, it really took people by storm. Anytime you make the sort of claims that they're making, right, good, bad, or otherwise, you're going to get people's attention, right? If you're saying we built an AI software engineer, some people are going to be stoked about that. Some other people, namely software engineers, are going to be obviously threatened by that. And then there's been like videos micro dissecting their demo video, and they're like, they lied, like Devon didn't even do what it was asked to do, which is technically true. If you go back and look at it, they asked it to do something on their demo video and it did something else that was tangentially related. I don't remember all the details. Straight up, like if the question is like, do I think that AI is going to replace software engineers? Absolutely not. I think there's a level of creativity in understanding. I mean, because it basically goes back to what is software, right? Software is at its core taking some sort of problem, process, or practice, uh, defining the solution in a very black and white, stepwise manner, and being able to repeat that solution at scale. Um, and there's a lot of people that are really good at writing software, writing code, especially at the university level, right? When they're teaching you to write software, it's easy when someone gives you a very firm assignment to say, you must manipulate the data in this way, and here's the correct result, and let me know when you have it, right? The hard thing comes when you get out into the real world and you don't have someone telling you exactly what uh, the definition of success is. It takes an intelligent human being to decide kind of what that is. And a lot of it is just understanding your problem domain, understanding the people that are going to be interacting with your software, and understanding how that should be done best. And that's, I think, the piece that AI is not even close yet. In terms of taking a firm instruction for, I need some code to do this, and writing that code, yeah, I think AI is there in terms of small enough problems. AI can write code that's just as good as me, if not better, and I use it for that all the time. Um, but ultimately, I think maybe while in 5-10 years, the idea of a coder may go away, because AI is able to, better write this machine consumable code. I don't think that idea of an engineer will ever really be truly replaced by an AI.
Can I play devil's advocate for a minute?
Absolutely.
So to continue this line of questioning, you're gonna have to pretend I'm not a software developer, because I'm not.
Sure.
Unless it's like Excel VBA, I've never touched the stuff.
He's a wizard at Excel, by the way.
We are an entrepreneurship podcast,
Hmm.
and what listening to you speak, it makes me wonder. You are a software developer.
Hmm.
You have obviously a biased perception about this discussion, and the way I'm looking at it from an entrepreneurship standpoint is, but if someone, I have no idea what Devon is. I'm not on X. I don't know what you guys are talking about, but I trust you both. If there is an entrepreneur, say me, who doesn't know how to code, couldn't you get away without a software developer by utilizing these tools? Meaning
Yeah.
you don't need it, meaning it replaces a software developer.
Yeah, sure. So there's certainly use cases that you previously would have had to engage someone who, a software engineer or someone who knew something about writing code to do, that a motivated guy, Wyatt doesn't know code, but he knows Excel and he understands reasoning and he really wants to solve this problem, and he has ChatGPT and Google and all that jazz. I absolutely think, and it's one of the things that in terms of looking at the world post AI revolution, that I think is very different is there's a whole class of technically savvy people that previously had, really didn't have the tools in their toolbox to be able to create code projects that, given enough time, energy, and persistence now, absolutely can. Um, and so in that sense, like, yeah, there's work that a software engineer used to do previously, that can now be done by AI. I think one thing that's really interesting, and one thing that we talk about a lot, in the company and whatnot, is the idea of like a shadow backlog, uh, or rather, like, what is the world's appetite for software? Because when you start talking about, like, okay, I used to have to hire a software engineer to make this change on my website or something like that, and now I can use ChatGPT, so that's a half hour that of software engineering work that's gone, replaced by AI. But on the flip side, I think that every software engineer, every technically minded person, every company that's writing software, there are so many things, even in a day, that you think of. You're like, man, that would be so nice to write this piece of code or to build this little tool, and it's like, there's no chance though. And then you just forget about it and you move on with your day, because you have to deal with realities, right? You only have so many
Sure.
hours in a day, so many dollars in your budget. Um, I can't remember who it was. Some at least reasonably respected AI technologist estimated that the appetite for software was 50 to 100 times the current essential output of software in a year. So
Wow.
if if the cost of creating software goes down or the access to software talent goes up, uh, that the estimation was that people would want and would create 50 to 100 times more software per year than what's currently being built. So
Oh,
I think it's just a question of, like, you know yes, maybe what we consider the work of a software engineer is changing, but I don't necessarily think it's like a true one-to-one replacement.
sure.
An analogy that comes to my head based off your kind of question, why is if AI enables you to build things, let's put it in the like construction zone. AI will never allow you to be an architect, but it will allow you to build things. So smaller things of lesser consequences, it'll allow you to do yourself very quickly, but you'll never be an architect who can craft a great building, who that building can weather storms and account for all these other variabilities that someone with a lot of experience, a lot of know-how can really plan for and taken to all of those things to make something that's resilient, that can last, that is greater than what you could have even come up with yourself. But you can still build fences. You can still build small sheds. You can do all those things that maybe you wouldn't have had access to before because you didn't know how to do those things. But the moment you try to build a skyscraper with AI, I would imagine in this, again, this analogy, I think that's at its at least foreseeable future is where it's probably going to crumble. And that's where somebody with a lot of experience who can really know the right questions to ask and knows a lot of the prior pitfalls and knows a lot of the things that, again, AI may give you the answer to but aren't pertinent to, is really where they're going to help you actually build something that's much, much better.
I understand the analogy that maybe I couldn't build a skyscraper, but I feel like if I tried really hard with the tools coming out and updating, every month something new comes out and better and bigger, I may not be able to build a skyscraper, but I could probably still build a pretty badass house.
And that's awesome. And
And
that's a
and way
really good
more than
thing.
I ever could have. And
Yep.
that's my argument
Mhm.
is I understand the value of delineating these two. I feel empowered as someone now who had no experience in a skill set. And before I couldn't build a doghouse. Now I can build a granite courthouse. It's not a skyscraper, but it's still pretty freaking awesome, right? And
Yep.
and I think that's the power we're seeing in it. I'm gonna have to explore this Devon thing, but
100%. And that's just what Hunter was talking about. That potential demand is so higher than the output could ever do, because could you have afforded that person, that architect before to build that house?
Exactly.
And you're like, no, but now you can. And
Mhm.
also now it's probably not worth, an actual accomplished software developer's time to go do this stuff, because the value of that in the market has just been plunged down to zero. So they're going to have to learn to do things that are maybe more fulfilling, by far more complex, and require a lot more expertise. So their roles are going to be significantly different. And anybody who's just been coasting, I imagine, is going to fall off very, very quickly.
and that's what you and I have been talking about for a year now, Tanner,
Mhm.
is it's not about AI replacing anything. It is or replacing jobs per se. It's going to make a skill set that much more valuable. Hunter, you talked about your previous college courses and how at the time you probably enjoyed them, but they were all pretty hypothetical, and now they're completely worthless in terms of theory, right? Um, it's the same thing that it just keeps getting better, but in order to succeed as a human being in the future of AI, you have to get to know AI. ChatGPT. Some people use ChatGPT just to dink around. Some people become prompt engineers, and that's a whole new level, right? And I imagine it's going to be the same with software developers. Is you kind of got to get with the program, and you have to be able to work within the system that some people fear.
People like to think that AI is different than a lot of previous, let's say, technical revolutions or evolutions in the way that we interact with technology. And it is to some degree because there's some amount of like infinite scalability or like kind of building on what you're building, and there's some exponential sort of possibilities there. But you look at the history of computing. I was just reading Walter Isaacson's book about the digital revolution, and kind of how that's evolved all the way back from Ada Lovelace, to present day. And I think you look at some of the major kind of leaps, right? You have you know initially computers were just theory, and it took 100 years for there to even be the electrical components to be able to build them. And then there was room size computers that you had to know exactly, you had to have a paper card, and you had to know exactly how to punch holes in that card in the right spot. And you had to know, you had to have access to this computer, and you had to be able to feed these things in. And then we had assembly, right? Where it's like you no longer have to write your code on by punching cards. You can do it in a computer. You can do it from anywhere, so on and so forth. And then you go kind of more English type code, and you have object oriented code. And essentially all these major kind of like evolutions in technologies, what it's done, and I think the same thing is happening with AI. More people with each evolution, more people have access, and it makes it so that the kind of niche technical like unfair advantage of understanding the nitty gritty of how whatever the method of the day works becomes less important. So as time goes on, it's accessible to more people, and it becomes closer and closer to the day when the best idea wins, right? Because I think that's where we're headed, right? We're headed to a place where it's not about, oh, I can code better than you, Wyatt. Like I know how to type these special kind of arbitrary sequences of characters and whatever better than you do, so I win. But now, like ChatGPT is getting, and AI and whatever, it's starting to get to the place where it's like if you have a better idea, you might have an advantage, and maybe in 3 years you definitely have an advantage. So there's something about like the capitalist in me, or student of economics. It is satisfying to kind of open up the market to a greater pool of competitors, really.
Hunter, you just said something that I'm gonna give a synopsis of what I think you just said, because I think it's really impactful. I think you just said something that's kind of blowing my mind a little bit. This is my synthesis of what you just said, is that creativity is an advantage to AI utilization.
Uh,
That's huge, and really does away with, for me in my head, a lot of the scary aspects about AI taking away jobs and AI doing this and taking over these entire industries. What you just said is that creativity is going to be a more valued skill set in most industries moving forward with AI, and I think that's huge. I've never considered it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to this, the skills curve, or whatever you want to call it. Um, you get out, you get out what you're able to ask for, right? And I think, yeah, I think it is accurate statement to say that creativity is going to be by far the most important aspect, because you're taking that mechanical, grinded out tenacity that was previously required, and it's becoming less and less necessary, because I can just say, AI, go and code this for me. I don't feel like it right now.
And it takes a one of the most nebulous things that makes humans humans. Forgive the woo-woo-ness of the statement, but it takes one of the most human things, which is creativity, and makes it even more important as we take away what could be deemed unnecessary or even sometimes menial tasks. It's going to instead, and there's always the debate about art and AI, and poor Tanner being an artist, he has his perspectives on this. I understand that, but I'm starting to create this picture in my mind about how this really basic human thing called creativity becomes more important and not less important in the future. And I think that's a really cool way to look at that.
As an artist, I think it's a good thing because natural inclination towards creativity, right? So
Sure.
if that becomes the superpower, I'm all for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an element too of access, right? Like it's understated, but like the access to such powerful systems from your phone is something that, like, even in my life I found to be pretty impactful. I'm a hunter. Like, besides my name being Hunter, I'm actually a hunter. And I remember a few months ago I was sitting in a deer blind, um, and it was slow. I had a very slow deer season in Nebraska. I don't know if either of you guys hunt, but it was rough. So, I was bored, and I had an upcoming trip that I was going to be traveling someplace for. And I was like, I really hate having to pack and having to like think about what I have to pack for a trip. And I was like, I wonder how close I could get to writing a computer program here sitting in this deer blind that, given some parameters about the trip that I'm going to take, will spit out a packing list for me. And so, you just start like, hey, write me a C# function that, given a number of days that I'm going to be gone, will spit out a starting packing list, right? And then it's like, okay, well, I think I need to also take into account what's the weather, right? So, okay, can you also update it to take into account the season? And do I need to work out or not? And so, you're just sitting there in a deer blind out in the middle of nowhere on your cell phone. And 15, 20 minutes later, after, some just thinking creatively about how can you decompose this problem of, generating a packing list, that I'm looking at like, wow, I have a C# program that I could put these parameters into and it will spit me out a packing list. And I did it from my phone. And that's like, kind of just that like access wherever or whenever, super impactful because, people experience thoughts and ideas and problems at many other times than just sitting in front of a computer. So
That's a great story. That's really cool.
Yeah. Well, and having a developer's mindset definitely helps in that regard too. And that's one of the reasons that I always recommend to people, especially younger kids, to learn how to actually develop. And it's one of those things that the news is saying like, oh, you don't need to learn to code anymore. But actually, again, it's the thought process, it's the reasoning, it's the different trails that you go off to problem solve, because again, you have that background of developing. So as a developer, you get those ideas and start thinking about all those different stages, compared to somebody who's never done that and they're just, I don't know, wondering what they're going to have for dinner that night or something.
yeah, and I think too, why you talk about with your own, I feel like I could build something with enough time and energy. I'm very excited for, I feel like in academia, there's going to be a significant, uptick in the fidelity of certain, academic areas being supported by code that they can now write themselves. So, technically minded or just tenacious academic people are going to be able to support their research with code that in a way that was like very much not a possibility before. And I do expect to see that that's going to have a significant, impact on the fidelity of research. And, I'm sure I don't even know all the ways that it's going to
Hmm.
be impactful, but
Is that the way of using like AI agents to actually be a lot of the workers for you to go out and do the tasks? Is that how you're kind of thinking about it, or?
I guess more in the sense of, you know, if you have people that, like, say, like a physics person that very deeply understands the problem domain and the math and whatever, all of the aspects of the problem that they're researching now, where they previously would have had to add an additional skill on top of that of learning how to code to be able to, build some of their own ideas to validate their research or perform experimental analysis and things like that. That now it's like, again, if you just have a understanding of the problem domain and a creative way of looking at it, there's a 0 to 1 kind of aspect of being able to write, small code projects that just didn't exist before.
Very cool. So Hunter, what else? What are some of your final thoughts on preconceived notions, misconceptions about AI, whether it's in the development world or somewhere else?
One way that I try to think of it as being someone who, in my own very small way, am a part of impacting, the AI that exists in the world. I build AI every day. Um, I think that maybe the thing that I try to think about most, people tend to think that AI is either evil or it's good or whatever, but either way, that kind of like the end is predestined, right? So people are, it's very common to hear like, oh, in 20 years, Terminator's gonna take over or not or whatever. And I think it's just important to keep in mind like the end is not written yet, and the outcome is going to be determined by, the work and the ethics and whatever the intentions of the folks that are writing these systems at any given time. So if that's something that's scary or whatever, it's like the best thing you can do is learn about it, start using it more, and then become a part of moving it in the direction that you would like to see it go. um, because the world doesn't ask permission to change, right? It's going to happen. So you can you can wish, or you can kind of get out and be a part of it. And
Well said.
Well, thanks, Hunter, for joining us on this podcast. Where can the audience find you online, and do you have anything fun that you're working on that you'd like to share with folks?
I've mentioned a couple times, but CodeBuddy is my company that we've been working on for a few years, helping software engineers and non-technical folks write better code, write faster code, and be able to build their dreams better. And we're on CodeBuddy.com. You can check us out there. Other than that, I don't have a huge online presence. I'm on LinkedIn and all that stuff, but yeah, CodeBuddy's my life. That's my passion. So if you want to check me out, go look there, and I'm sure you'll find me on the website somewhere. So
Well, thank you so much, Hunter, for coming on. I really appreciate it. I don't think I've had an AI developer perspective. And this is, I think this has been a really fun, really educational conversation for me. So thank you so much.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on. It's always good to bat it around with some smart folks. So
Thank you again, and thank you to everyone who's made it to the very end of the episode. I keep saying I need to put it at the beginning to ask people to like and subscribe and share, but I never do because I always forget. But yeah, if you made it to the end, please share with your friends, like the comments, rate us on all of the platforms, 5 stars, please. It dramatically helps the algorithms and spreads the word. So we really appreciate everybody, and we will see you all next week. Bye bye.